Arrival of the inspector. The starship drifted silently above the blue and green planet as the alien Inspector Keller stood near the wide observation window, his golden eyes fixed on Earth. For years, the Intergalactic Ethics Council had debated whether this small, fragile-looking species was ready to join the United Galactic Concord. And now Keller had been sent to judge them. His orders were clear: study the humans, understand their emotional balance, and decide if they could live in harmony with hundreds of alien civilizations without becoming a threat. Keller believed this would be simple because his research suggested humans were emotional creatures, prone to empathy, compassion, and fear. Their history was filled with stories about love and sacrifice, so he expected to find a gentle race, still innocent in their ways compared to other spacefaring civilizations. The transport module detached from the mothership and descended smoothly through the atmosphere, cutting through clouds as streaks of sunlight painted its silver hull. Below, the sprawling human city stretched endlessly, full of towering structures, flashing signs, and crowds moving like waves between them. Keller felt a strange fascination watching them from above, seeing how chaotic yet organized everything seemed. His assistant drone E-Re floated beside him, softly humming as it gathered atmospheric readings and scanned the surroundings for potential hazards. Humans were primitive by galactic standards, but they had developed their own technologies rapidly. And Keller could not deny a small sense of admiration for their progress. As they landed near the heart of the city, Keller disguised himself using the thin holographic skin that made him appear almost human, tall and pale with dark brown hair and neutral clothing. He wanted to blend among them without causing panic. His mission demanded silent observation, not interference, so he avoided revealing his true identity to anyone except a few local authorities who had been secretly informed of his purpose. One of them, a cultural liaison named Daniel, greeted him politely and offered to guide him through several planned events meant to showcase human society. Among these was a highly anticipated visit to something called a movie theater, a place where large groups of humans gathered to experience visual stories projected on massive screens. Keller was intrigued by this concept. In his experience, most species shared stories through direct neural links or collective memory streams, but humans preferred creating artificial worlds to watch from a distance. Daniel explained that the movie selected for the evening was extremely popular, though he warned Keller that it contained what humans called action scenes and a bit of violence. To Keller, this did not seem concerning. Violence was universally unpleasant to most sapient species, something that caused discomfort and distress, so he assumed the humans must be using it as a cautionary element, perhaps to teach moral lessons. As the sun dipped below the skyline and the streets filled with neon lights, Keller followed Daniel into a massive entertainment complex glowing with signs and filled with the chatter of hundreds of people. The energy of the place was overwhelming. He sensed excitement, anticipation, and unity, all emotions blending into a vibrant hum in the air. Inside the theater, they entered a vast chamber lined with rows of soft reclining seats, and Keller was surprised by how many humans had gathered, carrying buckets of salted snacks and drinks, as if preparing for some communal ritual. He settled quietly among them, adjusting his holographic disguise, and activated his emotional sensors to monitor the crowd. This would give him clear data on how humans reacted to whatever they were about to see. The lights dimmed, and the giant screen came alive with motion. Immediately, Keller was struck by the realism of what he saw. Armed warriors charging across shattered landscapes, explosions ripping through towering structures, desperate screams filling the air as bodies fell one after another. He felt his throat tighten. To his people, even simulated violence was distressing. It triggered deep instinctive fear responses that were nearly impossible to suppress. But Keller forced himself to remain composed as he turned his sensors toward the humans around him. He expected to detect panic, unease, or at the very least, mild discomfort. Instead, the readings confused him. Heart rates were elevated, but not from fear. The humans were excited. Many of them leaned forward in their seats with wide smiles, eyes shining as if they were witnessing something entertaining rather than horrifying. Some clapped, others laughed, and a few even cheered loudly as one fighter delivered a brutal strike that left an opponent motionless on the ground. Keller glanced sideways at Daniel, who casually tossed pieces of popcorn into his mouth, as if nothing unusual was happening. When Keller whispered softly, asking if the level of violence did not disturb him, Daniel simply replied, "It's just a movie, it's fun." That word, fun, unsettled Keller. He replayed the sequence in his head. To call it fun meant humans associated pleasure with acts of destruction and suffering, even when portrayed artificially. He leaned back into his seat, feeling his assumptions crumble one by one. Maybe this was just an isolated behavior, something unique to cinema, he thought. Perhaps they were conditioned to separate fiction from reality so thoroughly that no emotional impact remained. But a part of him, deep and instinctive, sensed there was more beneath the surface. The film escalated further. Scenes became bloodier, more chaotic, warriors screaming in rage as they fought to survive. Keller's own neural patterns struggled to stabilize as he processed it, but the humans sat relaxed, some sipping drinks without missing a moment. Their collective indifference puzzled him beyond reason. On his homeworld, even controlled simulations of violence required mandatory psychological counseling afterward. Yet here children watched without fear while their parents chuckled beside them. When the movie finally ended, the crowd erupted into applause. People stood, talking animatedly about their favorite fights, favorite weapons, favorite deaths. Keller's confusion deepened with every overheard conversation. He discreetly gathered emotional data from random individuals as they filed out of the theater, but instead of lingering trauma or disgust, he detected satisfaction and delight. The discrepancy between what his cultural database had taught him and what he had just witnessed was staggering. According to every known galactic model, prolonged exposure to depictions of savage violence should have left humans emotionally exhausted or at least mildly disturbed, but instead they seemed energized by it. Outside the theater, Keller remained quiet as Daniel asked if he enjoyed the experience. He avoided answering directly and instead asked how common such films were among humans. Daniel laughed and said they were extremely popular, and that this was mild compared to some titles that focused on far more brutal themes. Keller's golden eyes flickered beneath his disguise as he processed the idea that this was only the beginning of what humans willingly consumed for entertainment. He activated his recorder and whispered a preliminary observation into it, noting that human emotional responses to simulated violence were drastically different from other species and that additional testing was required to understand why. As the night deepened and the streets glimmered beneath neon lights, Keller could not shake a growing unease. If humans could watch so much carnage without flinching, if they could normalize brutality to the point of enjoyment, then what did that say about their true nature? He had come to Earth expecting to find a fragile race, one that might need protection from the wider galaxy, but as his ship's engines hummed softly above the clouds, a darker thought took root in his mind. Maybe it was the galaxy that needed protection from them. The testing experimenter could not stop thinking about what he had seen inside the cinema. The image of hundreds of humans watching brutal destruction without a flicker of discomfort lingered in his mind like a puzzle refusing to be solved. His training as an inspector had prepared him to handle cultural differences and emotional anomalies, but nothing in his education had explained this level of indifference towards simulated death. On his way back to the research module stationed above the city, he reviewed the emotional sensor readings again and again, hoping he had made a mistake, but the data was clear. The humans had experienced excitement, thrill, and pleasure during moments where other species would have collapsed in shock or walked out in distress. By the time he returned to his temporary orbital base, his assistant drone Erie was waiting. The spherical machine hovered in the corridor, its glowing blue optics focused on Keller's face, immediately detecting his unsettled state. Erie asked if the humans had failed the empathy assessment, but Keller hesitated to give any conclusion. Yet, instead, he explained the situation carefully, transmitting fragments of what he had witnessed, from their cheers during bloodshed to their laughter at scenes of suffering. Erie processed the data silently and then suggested that a controlled experiment might provide more accurate insights into human behavior. Keller considered the proposal and decided it was necessary. He sent encrypted invitations through the liaison network, selecting a small group of volunteers who were told they would participate in a psychological study designed to measure human resilience under stress. Among those who accepted were Daniel, the liaison who had accompanied him earlier, a woman named Maya who worked as a teacher, and Leo, a quiet mechanic, who seemed curious rather than concerned. To ensure the results were unbiased, Keller selected participants from different backgrounds, believing a wider sample would give him better clarity. 2 days later, the volunteers were escorted into a concealed section of the orbital station. None of them knew Keller's true identity or purpose, and to maintain secrecy, he continued using his human holographic disguise. He led them into a chamber equipped with immersive virtual reality pods, designed to replicate real environments. With near perfect accuracy, the participants were briefed only on the basic idea. They would be placed into simulated scenarios, and their responses would be monitored to study how they handled unexpected stress. None of them seemed worried. Some even joked about it as they entered their pods. Once the systems were active, Keller initiated the first simulation. The participants found themselves inside a war-torn cityscape, surrounded by collapsing buildings, fire, and chaos. Alien warriors clashed in brutal combat nearby, their weapons tearing through structures while explosions thundered across the simulated streets. Screams echoed around them, the ground shook violently, and debris fell dangerously close to where they stood. Keller observed their reactions closely from the control room, expecting panic or at least signs of fear. But instead, Daniel crouched behind cover and calmly analyzed the fighters' strategies as though he were watching a sports match. Maya helped Leo find a better vantage point and suggested which paths looked safest if they needed to escape, speaking in an even tone as if they were solving a minor puzzle rather than facing simulated death. The second simulation escalated further. This time, the environment was an ancient arena where alien gladiators fought using bladed weapons and heavy chains, striking each other with relentless force. The sounds of bones snapping and creatures roaring filled the air as blood splattered across the sand. Keller had designed the program to test the upper limits of human empathy thresholds, expecting stronger emotional responses here. Instead, Leo whispered to Maya about which gladiator might win, while Daniel laughed softly when one fighter cleverly disarmed another. Not once did any of them show distress. Their emotional readings reflected fascination, excitement, and heightened focus rather than fear or horror. Kellor turned to Erie in disbelief, wondering if the simulations had failed to produce enough realism to trigger authentic responses. But Erie assured him the environmental fidelity was within 98% of a real encounter, meaning the sights, sounds, and sensations mirrored actual experience perfectly. There was no error in the program. There was only something fundamentally different about the humans themselves. After deactivating the simulations, Keller interviewed each participant individually. Daniel described the experience as intense and entertaining, but emphasized that he had never once believed he was in danger, even when faced with overwhelming violence. Maya admitted that she felt a little nervous at first, but quickly adjusted and started analyzing the events like a strategy game. Leo confessed he found the whole thing fun and wished he could try a harder scenario next time. Keller noted every detail carefully, his mind spinning with conflicting conclusions. Later that night, while the humans rested in their temporary quarters, Keller accessed the Council's interstellar archives to review humanity's documented history in greater detail. What he found disturbed him far more than anything he had observed so far. Across millennia, humans had endured endless cycles of war, invasion, famine, and disaster. Yet each time they adapted and grew stronger. Entire civilizations had fallen, but humanity had risen again and again, reshaping itself like metal hammered under relentless fire. They had lived through unimaginable suffering for thousands of years, and instead of becoming fragile, they had evolved resilience so deep it bordered on numbness. Violence was not something they feared instinctively anymore. It was woven into their cultural memory, like an unspoken truth they had long accepted. Eerie floated into the chamber silently as Keller leaned against the console, staring at holographic displays of human wars from different centuries. Keller whispered softly that he might have misjudged the species entirely. He had assumed that their compassion defined them, that their creativity came from their ability to empathize deeply. But now he wondered if their greatest strength was something far colder, an emotional armor forged by survival itself. The next day, Keller arranged one final test. He brought the volunteers into a large observation hall designed to look like an alien coliseum. In the center stood two combat droids, programmed to simulate the tactics and physiology of actual alien warriors from different species. The demonstration began without explanation, and within seconds, the droids lunged at each other with bladed limbs and plasma charges, sparks flying and metal screeching as they fought viciously. Keller watched the humans closely, expecting at least some instinctive discomfort when confronted with violence, so close and seemingly real. But what he saw instead sent a shiver through him. The humans leaned forward in their seats, fascinated and eager, whispering predictions about which droid would win. Daniel asked if they could place bets. Maya laughed when one droid delivered a devastating strike, and Leo pointed out clever tactics as though he were watching a sport he had followed for years. The fight ended with one droid severing the other's limb before delivering the final blow, and the humans reacted with genuine admiration rather than unease. Keller stood in silence as his sensors confirmed what he already felt deep within his thoughts. Humans did not fear violence the way other species did. They did not recoil from it. They studied it, analyzed it, and sometimes even celebrated it. This did not mean they lacked empathy, but it suggested something far more complex. Something no other species in the Concord had demonstrated. Their ability to face destruction calmly was not an accident. It was an evolutionary advantage born from centuries of chaos and conflict. As the volunteers left the hall, Keller made a quiet recording for his preliminary report. In it, he stated that humanity's relationship with violence was unlike anything previously documented, and that further analysis was required before the Council could make any decision about their place in the interstellar community. Yet deep inside, he already sensed that whatever conclusion he reached would shake the Concord's assumptions about what it meant to be sentient and safe. When Keller returned to his quarters, he stood by the wide window overlooking Earth. The city lights glimmered like constellations across the darkened surface, hiding a species whose calmness masked a history of survival through endless storms. For the first time since beginning his mission, Keller felt something unexpected rise within him, a subtle unease that refused to fade. The humans were not fragile at all. They were something else entirely, something he could not yet define but would soon need to understand before the galaxy learned the truth too late. Beneath the calm Keller spent the entire night staring at the streams of data floating across the holographic console in his quarters. Every number, every reading, every recorded facial expression from the previous experiments confirmed the same impossible conclusion. Humans did not fear violence the way other species did. It was not merely that they tolerated it. They seemed comfortable with it, even drawn to it in ways Keller had never encountered before. The deeper he thought, the less sense it made, and his unease only grew heavier with each passing hour. When morning came, he summoned Daniel to the observation deck overlooking the blue curve of Earth. Daniel arrived relaxed, hands in his pockets, gazing through the transparent wall as sunlight glimmered across the oceans below. Keller studied him closely before finally asking why humans did not react to simulated destruction, or suffering the way most intelligent species did. Daniel glanced at him and smiled faintly, as though the answer was too obvious to need explaining. "It's simple," Daniel said in his calm voice. "We've seen worse in real life. When you grow up with a history like ours, you stop being shocked so easily." Keller pressed further, trying to understand. Daniel spoke of centuries of conflict, of civilizations built and destroyed, of generations that survived famine, plagues, and relentless wars. It became clear to Keller that violence was not an occasional disturbance in human history. It was a constant presence. Every era brought new struggles, and each time humanity adapted rather than collapsing. Daniel described it without pride, almost with detachment, as though it were simply a fact of existence rather than something remarkable. Keller returned to his quarters afterward, with Daniel's words echoing in his mind. He accessed the council archives again and began a deeper dive into Earth's historical records, bypassing the simplified cultural summaries usually provided to inspectors. The information flooded his interface: endless battles across continents, uprisings, invasions, mass extinctions, caused by both natural forces and human decisions. Keller watched visual records of world wars where entire cities were reduced to ruins while millions perished. Afterward, the survivors rebuilt, created new societies, and advanced faster than before. The images unsettled him. Most species subjected to repeated catastrophic trauma became withdrawn, fragile, unable to handle further stress. But humans grew. More resilient, more adaptive, and more capable of enduring chaos than any life form Keller had ever studied. It was as though their minds had evolved a shield, allowing them to process destruction without breaking. What disturbed him most was how they had transformed this instinct into entertainment, weaving stories of death and struggle into their cultures, games, and media until the line between real and imagined conflict blurred seamlessly. Later that day, Keller convened with Erie in the private analysis chamber. The drone projected graphs comparing empathy thresholds across dozens of sapient species. On average, 94% of species showed elevated trauma responses when exposed to simulated violence. Humans registered less than 12%. Erie hovered silently for a long moment, before stating in its neutral tone that humans might possess an entirely different neural adaptation, one that allowed them to detach emotionally from situations that would cripple others. Keller did not want to accept it without one final test, something that would remove all uncertainty. He needed to see how humans reacted when there was no screen between them and the violence, no simulation to remind them they were safe. If humans truly lacked fear of destruction, the proof would show itself in a real confrontation. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A cargo skiff from a neighboring alien settlement had recently arrived at the station, carrying 2 live combatants from a reptilian species known for their vicious dueling culture. Keller arranged for a private demonstration, under the guise of showing the volunteers something rare and extraordinary. Daniel, Maya, and Leo agreed without hesitation, curious to see alien technology up close. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with protective energy fields, and in the center stood a raised platform where the two reptilian fighters faced each other. Their scaled bodies glistened under the pale light as they hissed low threats in a language the humans could not understand. When the duel began, the sound of metal against bone rang sharply through the hall. The fighters moved with terrifying speed, claws slashing, tails whipping, each strike brutal and final in intent. Keller turned his sensors toward the humans, expecting at least some instinctive recoil, some sign that they understood the danger and wanted to distance themselves from it. Instead, what he recorded unsettled him even more than before. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes tracking every motion as though studying tactics. Maya watched with fascination, whispering observations to Leo about the fighters' movements. Leo himself grinned faintly when one combatant landed a perfectly timed counterstrike. Their heart rates rose, but not from fear. It was anticipation, the same excitement Keller had seen in the theater, in the simulations, in every experiment so far, when one reptilian finally drove its blade through the chest of the other, ending the duel in a single devastating motion. The humans did not cry out or look away. They exhaled softly, almost in unison, as though the conclusion had satisfied an unspoken expectation. Daniel even muttered quietly, "That was clean," and Maya nodded in agreement. Keller stood frozen, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The violence had been real this time, the death undeniable, yet the humans displayed no shock, no horror, only a detached focus, as if their minds had been trained for moments like this. Eerie floated silently beside him, its data readouts confirming everything his senses already told him. The humans' responses aligned perfectly with patterns of calculated observation, not instinctive empathy. After the demonstration, Keller escorted the volunteers back to their quarters, unable to hide the growing weight in his thoughts. Once alone, he recorded a confidential message to the Intergalactic Ethics Council, summarizing his findings so far. He reported that humanity's resilience bordered on something unprecedented, that their calm under pressure suggested not apathy but a deep, psychological adaptation forged by countless generations of survival through conflict. He warned that further study was essential before any decision about their integration into the Concord could be made. But even as he sent the message, he felt something uneasy stirring beneath his reason. Watching the humans today had given him a glimpse of something no data could fully explain. They were not indifferent because they lacked empathy. Rather, they had learned to compartmentalize it, to lock it away when survival demanded focus instead of fear. It was not numbness but control, and Keller realized with growing clarity that such control could make them unpredictable allies or devastating enemies. That night, he stood before the observation window once more, watching the swirling clouds and glittering cities below. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he felt a quiet sense of awe mixed with dread. He had come believing humanity was fragile, expecting to find a species still learning how to manage its emotions. Instead, he had uncovered something entirely different, a species tempered like steel by an unbroken chain of chaos, capable of facing destruction without hesitation. What unsettled him most was not their past but their potential. If this was how humanity reacted in moments of danger now, he wondered what they might become once they stepped fully into the wider galaxy, where threats were far greater and conflicts far bloodier than anything they had known before. Somewhere deep in his mind, an unspoken warning took shape, though he could not yet bring himself to voice it. The galaxy might not be ready for humanity. Rising tension. Keller stood inside the council chamber aboard the massive orbital station. Its walls curved like the inside of a colossal sphere, glowing faintly with layered holographic projections of alien delegates. Representatives from over 100 worlds had gathered for an emergency session after receiving Keller's preliminary reports on humanity, and the air was thick with disagreement. Some species were intrigued by his findings and saw humans as potential allies capable of handling the harshest conflicts, while others were openly alarmed by what Keller had uncovered. The council leader, a tall avian diplomat whose iridescent feathers shimmered under the chamber lights, called for order. But the voices around Keller rose louder with each passing moment. A pale, translucent being from the Zarlin cluster demanded immediate rejection of Earth's application, insisting that any species that celebrated destruction was too dangerous to trust. Across from them, a towering representative of the Raxian Empire slammed a clawed fist against the table and declared that humanity's resilience was exactly why they should be welcomed. A species forged in hardship would be a valuable shield against the growing threats lurking beyond Concord borders. Keller sat silently at his assigned station, his golden eyes focused on the holographic display of Earth suspended in the center of the chamber. He had expected debate, but he had not anticipated this level of division. Every word of his report had become fuel for arguments he could no longer control. He glanced at Erie hovering beside him and received a private transmission from the drone, reminding him to remain neutral until formally questioned. He nodded slightly, even though inside his thoughts churned like turbulent water. Finally, the council leader turned to Keller and requested that he explain his findings in person. As the chamber fell into a tense hush, Keller rose slowly, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. He began carefully, explaining how humans displayed an unusual emotional response to depictions of violence, how they could observe destruction and conflict without the instinctive trauma seen in other species. He described the simulations, the real duels, and the way the volunteers remained calm and focused where others would have recoiled in fear. A murmur spread across the chamber as his words sank in. Keller continued, emphasizing that this did not mean humans lacked empathy or compassion. Instead, they possessed a unique adaptability, one that allowed them to compartmentalize fear and remain composed under extreme stress. This trait, he warned, made them unpredictable in ways the council did not yet fully understand. Before he could finish, a delegate from the Thyner Dominion interrupted sharply, accusing Keller of exaggerating the threat. Another delegate, this one from the Varix Alliance, countered that underestimating humanity would be a mistake they could not afford. The chamber erupted again, voices clashing like storm waves, and Keller could feel the rising tension building with every passing second. Amid the chaos, a sudden alarm pierced the air. The walls around the chamber rippled with urgent red warnings as the station's defense systems activated automatically. Keller spun toward Erie as data scrolled rapidly across its surface. An unknown vessel had breached security protocols and docked directly with the station's lower sector without authorization. The readings suggested a small strike team of heavily armed insurgents had infiltrated the station. Panic spread quickly among the delegates. Many species had limited experience with violence, and even the suggestion of an armed attack sent them scrambling from their seats. Security drones moved to lock down the exits while automated barriers sealed the chamber, but Keller knew the attackers were already inside. For a moment, his mind calculated likely outcomes and risks, wondering if the insurgents were targeting the council itself or attempting to assassinate specific representatives. Then he noticed something unexpected. While alien delegates fled, and security forces tried to form a defensive perimeter, the human representatives who had accompanied Earth's delegation did not retreat. Daniel, Maya, and Leo were already moving toward the central entrance where the attackers were likely to arrive, calmly scanning their surroundings for improvised weapons. Daniel grabbed a heavy support beam from a broken display fixture while Leo used a nearby service panel to override a blast door and cut off one possible access route. Maya directed panicked staff towards safer corridors, her voice firm and steady despite the chaos. Keller's sensors recorded everything in real time, confirming what he had begun to suspect. While most species froze under sudden danger, humans shifted into action without hesitation. Their heart rates spiked, but not with fear. It was controlled adrenaline, sharpened focus. They did not panic. They adapted. The attackers burst into the chamber moments later. 6 armored figures wielding plasma rifles, their movements fast and coordinated. They fired into the ceiling to create confusion, expecting the council to scatter helplessly. Instead, the humans moved instantly. Daniel slammed the heavy beam into one attacker's weapon, disarming them before striking another in the chest hard enough to knock them backward. Leo dragged a fallen security drone into cover and rewired its targeting system on the fly, turning its turret against the insurgents. Maya hurled a chair into one attacker's legs, knocking them off balance long enough for security drones to neutralize the threat. Keller watched in astonishment as the fight lasted less than a minute. The humans, without formal weapons or specialized training, had helped turn a coordinated ambush into a swift defeat. As the last attacker fell and station defenses secured the chamber, the other delegates stared in stunned silence at the 3 humans standing calmly in the aftermath, barely winded and already discussing what the insurgents' motives might have been. When order was finally restored, Keller could sense the shift in the room. Many species that had opposed Earth's membership now regarded the humans differently. They had not acted recklessly or out of aggression. They had acted decisively, with control and precision. The Raxian delegate leaned forward, declaring loudly that this demonstration proved humanity's strength and value to the Concord. Others remained silent, their earlier objections subdued by what they had just witnessed. Keller returned to his station and activated a private recording, whispering his thoughts for his official report. He admitted that he had expected humans to remain calm under simulated stress, but seeing them perform under real danger was something else entirely. He now understood that humanity's unusual relationship with violence was not rooted in apathy, but in their survival instinct. They had evolved not to freeze in the face of chaos, but to master it, to bend it into an advantage rather than succumb to it. Later, when the humans met with him privately, Daniel dismissed their actions as nothing special. "We've just learned to deal with trouble when it comes," he said with a shrug. "You do what you have to do, and you keep moving." To him, it was ordinary. To Keller, it was extraordinary and terrifying. As he gazed out over the station's viewport that night, watching Earth rotate below, Keller realized the Council's decision would not just change humanity's future. It would change the entire Concord. A species that thrived where others faltered, one that faced chaos without fear, could tip the balance of power in ways no one was prepared for. And somewhere deep within, Keller wondered whether the galaxy was ready for what it had just invited into its fragile order. The verdict: the council chamber had never felt so heavy with silence. The events of the past cycle were still fresh in everyone's mind. The ambush, the chaos, and the way the humans had acted without fear, turning what could have been a disaster into a swift victory. Now the delegates sat in their circular stations, the soft hum of holographic systems filling the void between nervous breaths. Above them, the holographic projection of Earth rotated slowly, its oceans glimmering under simulated sunlight. Keller stood near the center, a faint tension in his posture. He had spent the previous hours compiling his final report, organizing every recorded observation and personal analysis into a concise recommendation for the Concord Council. For days he had been uncertain of what he would say when this moment arrived, but now, after what he had witnessed, his conclusion was unshakable. The council leader, feathers shimmering with subtle light, called the chamber to order. One by one, representatives gave their statements. Some were still cautious, their voices filled with hesitation. The delegate from the Zarlan cluster insisted humanity's comfort with violence made them dangerous, unpredictable, and potentially destabilizing. Others countered fiercely, pointing to the humans' controlled actions during the attack as proof of discipline rather than savagery. Keller listened to every word, but did not speak until called upon. When the council leader finally addressed him, all eyes turned his way. He stepped forward, his golden gaze steady as he activated a personal data core. Projecting his findings into the chamber, he began carefully, explaining how humans had evolved. In an environment where survival depended not just on cooperation, but also on facing danger head-on. Their ability to process extreme stress without shutting down, their capacity to endure trauma while maintaining focus, and their instinct to act when others would freeze. These were not signs of recklessness, but adaptations born from necessity. He described the duels, the simulations, and finally the real ambush, recounting in detail how the human representatives had stayed calm, protected others, and neutralized the threat faster than most trained security forces could have managed. Keller paused before adding something unexpected, that the humans were not proud of what they had done. They did not celebrate violence. They simply accepted it as part of existence, another challenge to overcome. When Keller finished, the chamber remained silent for several long seconds. Then, slowly the debate resumed, but its tone had shifted. Where earlier there had been fear and division, now there was quiet respect mixed with lingering unease. No one doubted humanity's capability anymore. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for it. After hours of deliberation, the council leader finally called for the vote. The holographic chamber dimmed, and each delegate placed their decision into the shared system. Keller watched the display as symbols lit up one after another, a cascade of glowing affirmatives and rejections appearing like scattered stars in the dark. For a brief moment, it seemed too close to call, but when the final symbol appeared, the result was undeniable. By a narrow margin, humanity was accepted into the Concord. The announcement sent ripples through the chamber. Some delegates applauded softly, others whispered among themselves, and a few stormed out in frustration. Keller stood still, processing what this decision truly meant. Earth was no longer just another primitive world on the edge of known space. It was now part of the most powerful interstellar alliance in the galaxy. And with that acceptance came both opportunity and responsibility. Later, in a private meeting, Keller sat with the three human representatives, Daniel, Maya, and Leo, inside a quiet observatory overlooking the station's curved viewports. The Earth floated below, its blues and greens glowing against the infinite black of space. "You understand what this means?" Keller said softly. Daniel nodded slowly. "We're in," he said, his voice steady but thoughtful. "But I get the feeling it's not going to be simple." "It never is," Keller replied. "There are species who will welcome you, and others who will fear you. Some will see you as allies, others as threats. Your actions from now on will shape not just your place in the Concord, but the balance of the galaxy itself." Maya leaned forward, resting her arms on the transparent table. "Then we'll do what we always do," she said with quiet confidence. "Adapt, learn, survive." Keller studied her for a moment, noting the calm certainty in her tone. It was something he had noticed repeatedly among humans, the way they could face uncertainty without collapsing under its weight. To them, chaos was not a wall but a door. Another challenge waiting to be faced head-on. The next few weeks passed quickly. Humanity's official induction ceremony took place on the station's upper deck, where the Concord's emblem glowed against a backdrop of distant stars. Delegates from every world attended, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and concealed anxiety. The human anthem played softly as Earth's representatives stepped forward to sign the Concord Accords, sealing their entry into interstellar society. Yet beneath the celebration, Keller sensed an undercurrent of tension. Reports circulated of border conflicts with an unknown power beyond map space. Rumors whispered that the insurgent attack on the council had not been random, but orchestrated by forces determined to prevent humanity's rise. One night, long after the ceremony ended, Keller returned to his observatory, staring out into the void where faint nebulae glimmered like distant fires. He recorded a private note into his data core, his voice low and thoughtful. "Humanity has been welcomed into the Concord," he said. "But I do not believe the other powers will leave this unchallenged. I have seen how humans respond to chaos, and I have no doubt they will endure whatever comes. Yet I cannot ignore the possibility that their presence will change us all. Perhaps we will become stronger because of them, or perhaps we will all be forced to confront parts of ourselves we thought long buried." He paused, letting the silence stretch as he stared at Earth's reflection on the viewport glass. "They are not like us," he continued softly. "Where others falter, they rise. Where others recoil, they adapt. I once believed their lack of fear made them dangerous. Now I understand it makes them inevitable." Far below, Earth rotated slowly in the darkness, a fragile sphere of life standing at the threshold of a vast and ancient galaxy. Its people were small compared to the civilizations around them, but they carried something that no other species possessed: an unyielding drive to survive, to overcome, to keep moving forward no matter the cost. And somewhere deep in his thoughts, Keller wondered if this was the beginning of a new era or the prelude to a storm unlike anything the Concord had ever faced. Either way, there was no turning back. Humanity had arrived. The end.